and welcome to The Hard Questions. I'm Solomon Serwanja. On this episode, we put in context what happened in Somalia. The Al-Shabaab claims that they killed about 137 UPDF soldiers after raiding a camp. The Ugandan government has since put into place a commission of inquiry headed by the commander of the land forces, General Muhanga. That team will report back to the commander-in-chief about exactly what happened. But this brings us to debate about what's really happening in Somalia, and should we keep our troops there? As the mission prepares to wind down in 2024, what will it take the Somali government to develop its forces to protect its people? On this show, I host security analyst and the former deputy head of Amison, Ambassador Simon Mulongo. Ambassador Simon Mulongo, thank you so much for accepting to speak to us.
Thank you so much, comrade.
Since 2007, we have been in Somalia. There have been so many voices in support and against the African Union mission in Somalia, and us having boots on ground in Somalia. What do you make of this mission in its entirety?
Thank you so much for having me here. First of all, congratulations to Amison, currently called Artemis, which is nothing but a baptism of the name. Amison went to Somalia when there was a void of over 20 years without central authority. And as we speak now, we have the central government, the federal government, and also the regional governments called federal member states functioning. Their election that started of 2012 and growing in strength in direct elections to last year when they elected the current president. And parliament is in place, institutions of government are developing, and to me, that is attributed to nobody other than Amison. You may remember that in the 90s, after the fall of Siad Barre, there were a lot of skirmishes in the country, and the country was ruled by the warlords.
Yeah.
The law of the jungle prevailed, and there was no central authority. And an attempt by the US and the UN was futile. They were defeated badly, and they pulled out, leaving Somalia totally without any external support. So Amison came in to make a historical contribution that we can use African solutions to African problems. And now we have a semblance of government that we can talk to, that we can work with, and despite the fact that they are quite slow in their reconstitution, but there is something that is growing. And recently, about 3 days ago, there were discussions and agreement with the federal member states and the federal government to change the elections mode from the indirect elections based on the clans to universal suffrage, and to eliminate the position of the prime minister, which is the executive prime minister, and also to ensure that the term of office is extended from 4 years to 5 years, among other things, and guaranteeing the women vote to a higher number than ever before. Now, all these are developments that can be attributed to nobody other than Amison. So, and economically, the country is revamping itself. Today, the airport in Mogadishu receives more than 10 times the plane load, arrivals and takeoff than our airport, international airport in Entebbe. From no plane to 10 times the load of planes arriving at the airport like that of Entebbe. This is huge. International community is in place. All international actors are in place. The UN, the EU, and all other embassies that were not there before, they're now there. That cannot be attributed to anybody else. Not to those who failed in the 1990s, but those who came in from 2007. Make no mistake, Amison should be rewritten correctly in the books of history. Artemis is just a rebaptism by those who are jealous of the history and attainment of Amison. So to me, don't ask me about Artemis, ask me about Amison, because it is the same man, same gun, same boot. So changing the name cannot erase the core element of Amison with its achievements.
Well, big achievements, like you said, but this came on hundreds of our soldiers who have been sacrificed on the front line for peace.
Right. Right, that's right. I mean, these achievements have not come without pay and without price.
And we have paid heavily,
And we
especially
paid
Uganda,
heavily,
because we've
yeah.
had the biggest
The
contingent.
mission in Somalia is a war mission. It's not a peacekeeping mission. There's no peace to keep in Somalia. So we went there for war. And the cost of war can vary from lives to equipment to property and so on and so forth. And this we knew very well that it could come. And we've done so much. And let me tell you that both Somalis and ourselves have lost lives and equipment in that war. A war that has people who are highly trained, linked to Al-Qaeda, trained in the Middle East, others trained in other countries, and composed of people from the diaspora of Somalia to people in Eastern Africa, Comoros, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and all these other countries, Ethiopia, Djibouti. All these people constitute Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab are not just a small group of Somalis actors. These are nationalist, insurgent, terrorist groups, a combination that makes the war much more complex, using conventional warfare and also largely employing asymmetrical warfare, meaning using unconventional warfare. And they have been able to develop capacity to destroy equipment using IEDs and so on and so forth. So we've had to learn lessons from the ground and using those lessons to plow into our doctrines, strategies and tactics to be able to counter them. And Somalia is such a large country. You can have more than 2 Ugandas into Somalia. So the numbers which had risen to 22,000 have been drawn down to 18,000 now. And this next month, they're drawing down by 2,000 more. And by the end of the year, another 4,000. That makes the numbers dwindling so much based on one argument, that the war is too costly for the funders. And so they want numbers down.
Yeah, and the funding has significantly reduced over the
That's
years.
correct. That's
Yes.
correct.
Which makes it difficult for the mission to keep operating
Right.
at 100%.
But this reduction in strength is being done in total disregard of the security parameters on the ground. Because as we speak now, and that's what happened in Bulamarel, as we shall see, the numbers that you can afford in every FOB has drawn down from about 500 to just about 200 miners, which makes the security question of these forces a very fundamental one. We cannot look at just monies at the expense of the security of the forces, and at the same time demand that we get more results from the numbers that have dwindled. And I think for our funding partners who are supporting this are getting it wrong. And this is where the recent summit, President Museveni was very clear to his colleagues that we should not draw down simply because on account of money, but it should be on account of achievements. So the conditions must be ripe for the drawdown. As we speak now, the mission is set to end 2024 next year. If we're not careful, it will be a conundrum of Afghanistan, where we just handed over the country to the terrorist groups. And we cannot afford to do that.
But maybe there's some justification. Since 2007, we've had that mission operate strongly. You'd expect that between 2007 and now, the Somali government should have built a strong army to defend its territorial integrity. So the question of sustainability then comes in. How long will the mission stay? Will we be in Somalia forever, for example, since you're against the withdrawal of the mission from Somalia? Isn't it important for the government in Somalia to train its forces so strongly enough that they can be able to defend themselves?
That's a fundamental hypothesis. Right questions should get the right answers. Where is the problem? From what you're saying, and I agree with you, the problem is internal capacity for the country to stand on its own. What have these international partners done to help build capacity of Somalis? Instead of addressing that question, they're addressing a wrong question of we who are keeping the peace in Somalia or contributing to the peace in Somalia. Instead of telling us to draw down, they should instead put emphasis in issues of building capacity of the forces. I know that the Somali government has been too slow in building internal capacity. They have tried quite a lot using the tax. They've drawn the Horhos, the group called the Horhos, who are like special forces to them. And the numbers have been growing slowly, almost 500 to 800 a year. And that is too slow a pace. And when they ask us to draw down, they withdrew down in the multiple numbers over and above the Somalis. The European Union trained some soldiers. The Emiratis also trained, and so on. And the Americans also trained a special group called the NAPS and all this. But the numbers cannot be related to the drawdown rate. If you can give us 2,000 per year being traded in Somalia, and you're telling us to draw down 8,000 in 2 years, it doesn't just measure up. We don't mind leaving Somalia yesterday. And who wants to die in a foreign land? But we're just saying our strategic mission to Somalia is to have a peaceful neighbor with whom we can collaborate in terms of economics, in terms of trade, technological transfer, and so on and so forth. If Somalia is at war by itself with terrorists, it is a safe haven of trouble for the region and the international world. Why do I say that? Just look at the recent times when they were manning the waters of the Indian Ocean. There was hardly any movement on those high seas. And we suffered trade systems all over. The supply chain system was disrupted. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. It looks to be very far. But look at the backlash, economic meltdown, slowdown, and so on. We have now serious inflation in Uganda. So you can't sit here and say, we are Ugandans, we don't care what happens in Ukraine. But the effects are already biting us right here at our doorsteps. And Somalia is one other situation we cannot just stand on the sides. I've seen some politicians talk about that. Why are we dying in Somalia? We should leave Somalia. You cannot see a tree in your neighborhood growing snakes and say that is not my concern because in the neighborhood, those snakes will finally come into your house. So to get rid of those snakes from that distance in time saves a lot. And that's why I think that, as you asked, one, the mission has been very successful, albeit the challenges which are not entirely ours. The problems are mainly exogenous, issues of funding, issues of internal capacity building to enable us pull out at the time when they are capable of managing their own resources, their own security arrangements. So to me, that one is a serious problem that we cannot attribute to troop contributing countries alone.
Ambassador Mulongo, how many more soldiers do we have to lose on foreign nations? We've lost so many. And yet we think, we would have thought that our men in uniform would come back home and defend the territorial integrity of this country. Recently, we just lost, the Al-Shabaab claims about 137. There's so many coffins that have been brought back at the Entebbe International Airport. And many Ugandans are asking, is it really worth for us to keep in Somalia? Shouldn't we just come out?
Yes, I've just told you a scenario where the option of coming out can be more costly in the near future than it is now. Because if we just imagine the test we had in 2010 during the Africa Cup of Nations, look at Kenya, look at the bombing of embassies and so on. If Somalia terrorist groups gain capacity to be able to overrun the regional governments, we would have much more trouble. And that's why the Americans, despite the distances, anything that affects the system that feeds them, they will swing into action. That's fundamental. So I think we made a very strategic decision that is in favor of ourselves and our posterity. That's one. Secondly, the UPDF in Somalia is just a small fraction of the entire armed forces in Uganda that are keeping the integrity and security of Uganda. We have not been able, we have not had any serious incursion on the territory of Uganda for very many years now. Because of that, the posture, the organization, and professionalism of the UPDF has kept Uganda very safe. We don't have the attacks from outside Uganda onto the soil of Uganda because of that. Finally, let's look at the performance of UPDF in Sudan. Because of UPDF and other partners who were able to afford the Southern Sudanese to gain independence upon their wishes. We have a very peaceful and cordial relationship with South Sudan. Until when they had their own internal problems, we're enjoying serious economic gains, and which continue. That's an extension of the market of Uganda for the time being. And even if they grow their own internal capacity for economics, we'll only be trading at par. gains to each other. Look at Congo. We had to invest a lot to make Kinshasa regain the capacity to control their own country, which they did. They may have some issues in the Eastern DRC, but at least it's a country running in Congo. We can relate with them. We can make agreements with them. We're now trying to make a joint infrastructure program into an Eastern Congo. These are the things that UPDF missions outside are paying off. Central Africa, they may have their own issues. Coin is no longer a big threat to Uganda. We have decapitated the capacity of coin to come and cause mayhem here. All these are missions worth mentioning in terms of achievements of sacrificing the lives and equipment of Uganda's armed forces outside there.
And you said it's worth it.
Yes, it's worth it. The Baganda say ensegula mirambo, of course, but the issue is that sacrifice of war, there is when we go to war to bring peace. Some people think you can just go and use peace to create peace, but not all conditions require that you can use peaceful means to gain peace. And for the Al-Shabaab, I can tell you that you cannot win terrorism entirely using military means, and you should get me right on this. As a security analyst and a conflict student, we have to use a multi-pronged approach. We have to find a way of talking to the Al-Shabaab, and we have been doing that. I've personally gone into very dangerous missions of engaging the Al-Shabaab, and we have had some talks with some of them, and some have come out. The former president, Sheikh Ahmed Sharif, was one of the senior leaders of Al-Shabaab, Islamic Union Courts. People like Mukhtar Robo was one of the number 2 leaders of Al-Shabaab. But there are those who are fundamentally disagreeable to the Western notion, and they want Somalia and the whole world from here in Eastern Africa and Middle East, sprawling to Alaska and to Japan and China and Solomon Islands to be ruled under the strict Islamic law, which Islamic law is nothing but extremism, which we cannot accept. So we're not talking about a threat to Uganda alone. We're talking about a threat to the region and the global world. We think we have attained a level of civilization that cannot be overthrown just like that, without reason. We think governance and rule of law, constitutionalism and all these are the normal order that we have attained after all the wars in the past that we lost so many lives and equipment in Europe, in Africa and everywhere. So this time on the question of Somalia and the question of the regional wars, Uganda made a decision because of the beliefs, the philosophy that President Museveni and the NRM government espoused, correctly so, and justified by municipal law, the national laws, and also correctly and justified by international norms and laws.
Maybe that also plays into our foreign affairs policy, but we'll get to that shortly. Yes. Let's speak about of course, we have about 5,000 UPDF soldiers in Somalia, boots on ground, and about the Al-Shabaab claims that they killed about 137 in a surprise attack. And the president has come out to actually give a statement and saying that the UPDF will retaliate and will, fight back and will fight on, and it will not water down the energies and the morale, but also said that our forces panicked. Take us there, for my audience, take us into that region where that attack happened, and also to give us your general context on what you make of it.
Yeah, first of all, the UPDF has never suffered this kind of setback before. We've had some other sectors, other contingents from other brotherly countries that suffered that, where they have the base overrun and so on. We've been resisting and fighting very well. And I want to tell you that the background of the UPDF, having evolved from an insurgent group to those now in the government, the professionalization, the equipping of the UPDF, the discipline of UPDF have given it a high mark in the performance among other troop contribution countries in Somalia. Now, this incident has raised many questions as what could have happened, given the very good performance I've mentioned. One is it possible that these people could have approached the base camp for days and we did not notice? And that they only notice them when they are entering the base camp areas, the killing grounds. because I'm told that, and as the president put it rightly, that they were managed to be engaged by the quarter guard gunners as they were entering near the quarter guard. So that means that we did not perhaps know about them until when they are within the vicinity. So the question is, what happened to intelligence there? Could have been a lapse. Could it have been a lapse in intelligence that we were not aware that they were meeting? Some sources claim that when there was a conference by the scholars, the militants themselves, the Islamic groups who are part of the Al-Shabaab ideology, when they were planning for this, they picked the signal that they were planning to attack that base. And I don't know how true it is. And if it is true, what could have happened? Did somebody slip on his duty? So all this, the investigations will bring out. The other thing is that not all the guns that had been positioned, as His Excellency President Museveni pointed out, were seemingly put to use. Not all of them. So we want to know the gunners in their positions. Did someone slip on duty on his part? So I think the current board of inquiry that is being done by Uganda and also jointly with the African Union and ATMIS will give us the answers to this. And then 3, the numbers and claim by Al-Shabaab needs to be looked into. They are saying 137. Al-Shabaab are populist propagandists, and they will have shown the entire 137 head to body to leg, chest to the leg. They would have shown each of those bodies up to 137. Instead, what we're seeing are numbers like 10, 12. So the bodies we're seeing. Secondly, they say they captured so many, but I'm seeing like 2, 3 guys being pushed, another one, held at gunpoint. If Al-Shabaab were to kill, to capture like a group of 15, 20, they would have filmed them together with their hands up, because they would like to gain the attention of their funders that they are working so well. And 3, the next F4B, which is about 12 kilometers away, the number that reported that next F4B is over 65% of the 200 that were there. So this leaves about 35% to be explained. And of the 35%, our special forces in the last 4 days have been actually recovering, the search and recovery, where they're going everywhere and managing to pick the people who have gone astray or moved away from the FOB. And the numbers goes to almost 30 in the last 4 days. So what does that leave the numbers to be? The answer can be by you and me. And I also want to assure you that from what I've picked on the ground from my sources, the Al-Shabaab did not make off with the equipment, our tanks, 2 tanks, our armored vehicles, UAVs, ammunition, and other supplies successfully. Because using aerial resources that are at the disposal of the mission, both by partners and the UPDF helicopters, they managed to destroy all of them. They destroyed the equipment, they destroyed the ammunition, they destroyed the vehicles, and so they were not able to drive away at all. And a number of them have been killed in the course of moving out. And the search and the rescue mission is also targeting those people who are moving away in small groups of 2s, of 3s, of 10s, and so on, as long as they identify to be the Al-Shabaab fighters. So I want to say that yes, we've suffered a huge setback. Yes, there are many questions to be answered that will derive lessons learned to see where we should strengthen. If we are slow in our actions, we should know. If we're not alert, and the military are very much conscious, between 2:30 to 5 is the period for attacks. We do attack at that time when we want to attack the enemy. And that's when we become most alert. So we want to know what could have happened with that doctrine, and so on and so forth. So I just want to tell you that this fatal challenge can only but give us lessons to learn from.
Yeah, lessons as we clock to 2024, when we need to get out of Somalia. There is the African Transition Mission in Somalia. which of course was set up to sort of support the winding up of business. Do you think that 2024, all our men in uniform and the mission needs to officially close and we hand over the security of Somalia to Somalia?
The exit strategy is based on conditions, that the purpose for which we went to that mission has been attained, at least adequately enough. But where those conditions are not ripe, it will be catastrophic. It will be a fatal failure if we left the country, which can be taken over after a short time by the enemy forces that we're fighting. It will be totally a huge waste of the gains that we've made so far, and will be a reversal of the very purpose for which this mission was set up. So yes, the calendar ticks towards 2024, but the circumstances, in my own view, are not yet ripe for the mission to withdraw from Somalia in the next 1 year. It will not be adequate. And as I said, we shall be playing into the conundrum of Afghanistan, where the enemies entered government, and now we're at a very awkward position as to how we can relate with them. And we don't know how much damage they may do in future using their own doctrine and philosophy of Islamization and also urbanization of the whole world.
The challenge then becomes with the funding, because, I mean, we need money, we need resources. Even when you don't want the forces to pull out by 2024, we need money to keep those forces in Somalia, to keep the missions active, to keep fighting on, and to, you know, to push back on the Al-Shabaab. Then what is the way forward?
I think the summit recently reconsidered that problem, and they said in the meantime, particularly to the frontline states, including backed by Uganda, they said that they have to rethink the issue of close down of the mission. The extreme circumstances that the donors do not want to continue supporting the mission, the troop contributing countries may reconsider going bilateral between them, Somalia, the host government, and them as troop contributing countries. Because we do not go there simply to please some external actors. Two, the challenge that may follow that premature, can I call it miscarriage of delivery of security in Somalia, are enormous, not just to the region, but also to the global world. You'll have many refugees going to the doorsteps of this region. We already have them. There will be much more crossing the Red Sea and crossing the Mediterranean. And that's where our colleagues out there go wrong. They are looking at the war, prosecution of the war in Ukraine, and they think that the problem cannot come from the back. It's a wrong strategy for them to do that, because you must have all your front lines guarded. You cannot just put your focus in one area. And besides, the cost of prosecution of the war in Somalia, for example, and the Sahel is much lesser than the cost of war elsewhere. And we're not even using the NATO standards in terms of numbers per square area. We're using for example, the area supposed to be occupied by our forces in Somalia is so huge, multiple size, the forces acceptable by NATO standards. So our war in Africa are much cheaper, and I will urge them to reconsider that and continue supporting, partnering with Africa for the sake of global peace and global stability.
2024 comes and we're out of Somalia. What are your fears?
My fears, as I said, are very clear. Al-Shabaab will regain control of Somalia. It will not take long. And then the issue of terrorism will now be legit in Somalia, and will have the freedom to organize and maneuver, not just in Somalia, but across the region and across the world. It will be a nightmare in the near future for us as a region and as a world.
But isn't it a failure on Amison for failing to strengthen the forces in Somalia to be able to defend their own territorial integrity for the sake of sustainability?
As I told you earlier, we have problems that are forcing us to exit, that are more exogenous, are more foreign than local. For us internally, we have managed to prop up the government, protect it, and it is growing. Ever since 2007, the government in Somalia has not been overthrown. Nobody has tried to overthrow the government in Somalia because we've been there and we're there. Secondly, other institutions of the state are blossoming. The regional governments are in place. And as I said, they have done some internal training of forces, albeit being too slow. And mark this, Amison is not responsible for training forces in Somalia. It is the foreigners, the Turks, the Emiratis, the European Union, the Americans. These are the ones who are responsible for training. That was removed from Africans. It was removed from Amison. So we're not responsible for the quality of the people that are training. Finally, to form a soldier takes time. Look at Simon. I was first trained in terms of security matters way back in the early 80s and also in the government from 1990. Okay? So how many years are those? I can boast of 30 years of experience. But you're telling me that the Somalis who will be training in 2 years will now take over the reins of their state apparatus and manage? How will they get the generals, whose generals are supposed to be at least 15 years for you to become a one-star general? That is if it's very premature. It takes over 25 years for one to make a general. And moreover, rigorous training and combat experience. So you want to expose Somalis who have been training for the last 5 years to become the generals, to become the senior officers, and to become combat-ready forces, and to counter Al-Shabaab, who have been at the game since 2006? I think this is a matter that should be seen differently. So Amison is responsible for certain things, but the biggest problem here of forming and generating a force internally is that of the donors, not us. So that question should be addressed to them.
Your conclusion? My
conclusion is that African Union mission in Somalia, Amison, made huge success. We made history that has not been made before, after those who attempted to bring peace to Somalia failed miserably. And I want to say that the Amison, the African Union mission in Somalia, succeeded in the analogy of African solutions to African problems. We are being failed mainly by the external actors, not ourselves. For UPDF, who have conducted themselves very professionally in Somalia, a loss in a battle is not a loss in the war. We shall find out exactly what happened, but I can assure the viewers and the listeners that whatever mistake that could have been will be corrected. And remember, out of about 30 FOBs that we have, it is only this that has been overrun. The rest are intact and doing their work very well. And for the gallant sons and daughters of Uganda, congratulations for that, and my sympathies and condolences to the families that lost our dear ones, and condolences to the UPDF, and condolences to the government and the people of Uganda.
Yeah. When you're closing, you talked about our performance in Somalia, and it reminded me, of course, of those small pockets of indiscipline, stealing of fuel, raping of women. We've also done some terrible things in Somalia, by the way, because I know that there have also been courts that have put soldiers
on trial,
and they have convicted them. I know that there are disciplinary measures that were put out by the UPDF itself to try to correct the wrongs. So I think that we also had our own issues in Somalia.
Yes, we've had our own issues. Some of those internal issues of human rights abuses and misconduct have been put to trial. Anybody that has been implicated in any wrongdoing, it doesn't matter at what level of the mission, we never hid anything. We came out with a strong investigative machinery and tried those who were responsible. For those who are guilty, they have been penalized, some of them to death. And that tells you that the UPDF and the Uganda government and Somalia and African Union mission Somalia do not accept or condone any wrongdoing. So whatever allegations that they were fully investigated, tried, and punishments were meted out.
Yeah, I followed that closely. Finally, Simon, the issue of remuneration. I didn't want to really get it out of this conversation. Remuneration of the soldiers. Well, I saw different politicians talking about it. As we wrap up, your thoughts on those allegations that some of the soldiers haven't been paid. You've been deputy head of mission. You know exactly what it means for you to be there, and allowances delayed or even not paid. You've heard of those allegations quite strongly. I wanted to pick your mind.
Okay, it is true that they've had some remuneration challenges, but that's entirely not the government of Uganda made. These challenges emanate from the funders. And for emolument, it's the European Union. And this was because the negotiations into the transition mission, Artemis, took long to take root. And there are also challenges at the AU headquarters where they were trying to streamline the mission structure of Artemis as compared to the Amison. So all these played into the gaps of cash flow in terms of remuneration. But I'm told that some of the things are getting resolved, and people, despite those gaps, have started being paid out in terms of the backlog of the areas, salary areas, or allowance areas. So yes, this has been, and again, that is another area which cannot be attributed to the troop contributing countries, including Uganda. It's not our making. Back here, the government pays those soldiers in time their salaries on their account. So the issue is the other side, where the partners are supposed to provide emoluments in terms of allowances.
Okay. Ambassador Simon Mulongo, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. It's been quite an informative discussion, and we're learning so much, and hopefully it can help us ground us more as a country in these missions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and for according me the opportunity to speak to my fellow Ugandans and other people at large.
Well, I've been speaking to Ambassador Simon Mulongo, the former deputy head of Amison. He's also a security analyst. I'm Solomon Serwanja, and this is The Hard Questions.